Have you ever considered that the very first conversations humanity ever had, beyond simple grunts and pointing, might have been about taxes or land ownership? It sounds strange, doesn't it? We often imagine ancient peoples discussing grand philosophies or hunting strategies, but the archaeological record, especially in what we call the Fertile Crescent, whispers tales of administrative minutiae and property disputes, suggesting that civilization, in its earliest form, wasn't always romantic. This is where we begin our journey into the oldest civilization, a story that starts with a people whose names we now know, whose cities we've painstakingly unearthed, yet who often feel as hidden from us as the silt-laden rivers they depended upon. The Sumerians, for that is what we call them, didn't just appear out of nowhere, of course. Their origins are still shrouded in the mist of prehistory, a subject historians still argue whether they were indigenous to Mesopotamia or migrated there from elsewhere. However, what we do know with reasonable certainty is that by the late Ubaid period, roughly 4500 to 4000 BCE, distinct cultural traits began to coalesce in southern Mesopotamia, laying the groundwork for what would become truly revolutionary. Imagine a landscape crisscrossed by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, prone to devastating floods, but also blessed with incredibly fertile alluvial soil. This was their canvas, and they painted upon it the first large-scale human settlements. These early communities, nestled between the life-giving but unpredictable rivers, developed ingenious solutions to manage their environment, particularly through the construction of intricate irrigation systems. It was a massive undertaking, far more complex than a simple ditch. We're talking about canals that stretched for miles, diverting water from the rivers to cultivate vast tracts of land, turning barren plains into verdant fields of barley and wheat. This wasn't just about growing more food. It was about creating a surplus, a fundamental shift that allowed for specialization of labor. Suddenly, not everyone had to be a farmer. And that, my friends, is where things get really interesting. Some people could dedicate their time to crafting pottery, others to weaving textiles, and still others to managing the community's resources. The very first bureaucrats, perhaps, counting grains and allocating plots, probably with a perpetually worried look on their faces. This specialization led directly to the formation of larger, more complex settlements, evolving from villages into what we now recognize as towns, and then, remarkably quickly, into the world's first cities. The transition from scattered villages to dense urban centers like Eridu, Uruk, and Ur wasn't merely an increase in population. It was a complete societal transformation. Picture a bustling Uruk around 3200 BCE, its ziggurat temples reaching towards the sky, its streets teeming with people. A cacophony of sounds and smells, a veritable melting pot of human activity. These cities weren't just collections of houses. They were organized entities with distinct social hierarchies, from the priests and kings at the top, down to the farmers and laborers who formed the backbone of their economy. The earliest forms of governance emerged from the need to manage these complex societies, to distribute resources, resolve disputes, and organize communal projects like those massive irrigation networks. It was a fascinating blend of religious and secular authority, with the temple often serving as the economic and administrative heart of the city, controlling land, labor, and trade. The priests, acting as intermediaries between the human and divine, held immense power, overseeing not just spiritual matters, but also the collection and redistribution of agricultural surpluses. It was, in essence, a theocratic system, where the will of the gods, interpreted by the clergy, was paramount. This intricate societal structure necessitated new ways of tracking information, of remembering who owned what, and how much grain was stored in the temple granaries. The sheer volume of transactions and records would have overwhelmed any purely oral tradition, leading to a crucial innovation that would forever change the course of human history. Imagine trying to remember every single bushel of barley that came into the temple storehouse, or every goat traded, without writing. It would be like trying to organize your entire life with sticky notes that disappear after 5 seconds. The solution? Born out of practical necessity rather than poetic inspiration, was the development of a system of record keeping that gradually evolved into what we now call writing. But that's a story for our next section, a tale of how humanity's first scratches on clay tablets would etch their legacy into eternity, proving that even the most mundane administrative tasks can lead to the most profound advancements. The Sumerians, in their quest to simply keep track of things, were about to unlock a power that would allow them to communicate across time and space, to tell their story, even if, at first, it was mostly about inventory. That sudden leap from scattered markings to something truly resembling writing, the kind that could actually convey complex thoughts beyond just 3 sheep here, is one of those moments in history that, if you could bottle it, would probably glow. Remember how we just talked about the Sumerians needing to keep track of every last bushel of barley and every traded goat? Well, that pressing administrative need wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was the driving force behind the invention of cuneiform, the world's first true writing system. Imagine the temple scribes, perhaps with a perpetually furrowed brow, trying to manage an increasingly complex economy with only tokens and simple pictograms. It must have been an absolute nightmare, like trying to run a multi-million-dollar corporation with only post-it notes and a Sharpie. This wasn't some sudden flash of genius from a lone inventor. Rather, it was a gradual evolution, a pragmatic response to the escalating demands of their burgeoning civilization, leading many historians to still argue whether its primary impetus was economic, religious, or a combination of both. Initially, around 3500–3400 BCE, the earliest forms of writing were indeed rudimentary pictograms, simple drawings that represented objects. A drawing of a head meant head. A drawing of a bowl meant food. Pretty straightforward, right? But try writing a complex sentence like, "The powerful king ordered the strong general to move his troops to the fertile plains by the river tomorrow afternoon," using only pictures. It quickly becomes incredibly cumbersome and ambiguous. The real breakthrough came when these pictograms began to represent not just objects, but also sounds, specifically syllables. This shift, occurring over centuries, transformed writing from a limited system of mnemonic devices into a flexible tool capable of expressing abstract ideas and grammar. The scribes, those unsung heroes of ancient bureaucracy, gradually rotated the pictograms, streamlined them, and began pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay tablets with a reed stylus. And voila, we have cuneiform, named for its distinctive wedge-shaped, Latin cunis, impressions. Think about the sheer practicality of it. Clay was abundant in Mesopotamia, easily molded, and when dried, remarkably durable. This wasn't like carving on stone, which was laborious and permanent, or writing on papyrus, which was fragile and expensive. These clay tablets were the ancient world's equivalent of a reusable whiteboard, or perhaps, more accurately, a durable ledger. Once a record was no longer needed, the clay could be recycled. If it was important, it could be baked hard in a kiln, preserving the information for millennia. And preserve it did. Thousands upon thousands of these tablets have been unearthed, ranging from mundane administrative records, lists of goods, contracts, receipts, to grand royal inscriptions, epic poems, and even school exercises. Imagine stumbling upon a 4,000-year-old student's homework, complete with the teacher's corrections. It's a strangely comforting thought, isn't it? Knowing that even back then, kids probably hated doing their sums. The development of cuneiform wasn't just a technological marvel. It had profound societal implications. For one, it created a new class of highly skilled professionals, the scribes. Becoming a scribe was a lengthy and rigorous process, requiring years of training in specialized schools, often attached to temples. These individuals, predominantly men, held significant power and prestige, as they were the gatekeepers of knowledge and information. They served kings, priests, and merchants, managing records, drafting laws, and composing literature. Their existence underscores a crucial point. Literacy was not widespread. The vast majority of the population remained illiterate, relying on scribes to read and write for them, which further cemented the scribes' elite status. It's a bit like how, for a long time, only a select few truly understood how computers worked, giving them a distinct advantage. Furthermore, writing facilitated the expansion of trade and governance. Contracts could be written and legally enforced, making long-distance commerce more reliable. Laws could be codified and disseminated, providing a foundation for a more standardized justice system. Royal decrees could be sent across vast distances, allowing kings to administer larger territories more effectively. It even allowed for the recording of history, myth, and religious texts, preserving cultural heritage and intellectual traditions for future generations. The very first libraries, collections of these clay tablets, began to emerge, serving as repositories of accumulated knowledge. It's truly mind-boggling to think that a simple desire to count sheep led to the creation of libraries filled with stories of gods and heroes. This innovation didn't just help the Sumerians manage their existing world. It fundamentally changed how they perceived and interacted with it, paving the way for the complex political structures that would define the next phase of their civilization. The competitive, vibrant, and often turbulent era of the independent city-states. Imagine living in a world where your closest neighbor, just a few days' walk away, could be your fiercest enemy one year and your indispensable trading partner the next. This constant dance between cooperation and conflict defined the era of the Sumerian city-states, a fascinating period that followed the invention of cuneiform and saw these urban centers bloom into independent, self-governing entities. Remember how we talked about the rise of large settlements like Uruk and Ur, and how writing helped manage their burgeoning economies? Well, these cities didn't just grow in isolation, they became powerful magnets, drawing in surrounding villages and establishing their own spheres of influence, often leading to fierce independence and frequent conflicts among competing Sumerian urban centers. Historians still argue whether these conflicts were primarily driven by disputes over land and water, or by a more complex interplay of economic dominance and ideological differences. Each city-state was, in essence, its own little country, complete with its own patron deity, its own ruling dynasty, and its own distinct identity. Think of them like the city-states of Renaissance Italy, Florence, Venice, Milan, but thousands of years earlier, nestled in the Mesopotamian plain. The most prominent among them included Uruk, often considered the largest city of its time, with its massive walls and the legendary figure of Gilgamesh associated with it. Ur, famous for its elaborate royal tombs. Lagash and Umma, perennial rivals locked in a centuries-long struggle over a fertile border region. And Nippur, which, though not a political powerhouse, held immense religious significance as the seat of the god Enlil, making it a kind of spiritual capital for all Sumer. The heart of each city-state was its ziggurat, a monumental stepped temple tower dedicated to the city's patron god or goddess. These towering structures, often visible for miles across the flat plains, weren't just places of worship. They were symbols of the city's power, its connection to the divine, and its collective identity. Building them required immense resources and coordinated labor, showcasing the organizational capabilities of these early civilizations. Imagine the sheer effort involved in moving countless sun-dried bricks, layer upon layer, to create something so grand without modern machinery. It makes your weekend DIY project look like a walk in the park, doesn't it? These ziggurats weren't just architectural marvels. They were integral to the theocratic system of governance, reinforcing the idea that the city and its king ruled by divine will. While religion certainly played a central role, the practicalities of daily life and the need for defense were equally pressing. The fertile land between the rivers, while a blessing, was also a source of constant contention. Control over irrigation canals and agricultural land was vital for survival and prosperity, leading to frequent border skirmishes and full-blown wars between neighboring city-states. Kings like Ianatum of Lagash or Lugalzagesi of Umma rose to prominence through military victories, their reigns marked by conquests and the erection of stelae celebrating their triumphs. These conflicts weren't always about total annihilation. Often, they aimed at extracting tribute, asserting dominance, or gaining access to critical resources. The art and inscriptions from this period vividly depict battles, sieges, and the grim realities of ancient warfare, reminding us that even the oldest civilization had its share of violence. Despite the internecine struggles, There was also a remarkable degree of cultural unity among the Sumerian city-states. They shared a common language, Sumerian, a pantheon of gods, and similar artistic and architectural styles. Trade networks connected them, exchanging goods like grain, textiles, and crafts, and even ideas. Scribes from different cities used the same cuneiform script, allowing for communication and the dissemination of knowledge. This cultural cohesion, even amidst political fragmentation, suggests a shared sense of identity, a feeling of being part of a larger Sumerian world. It's a curious paradox, fiercely independent, yet deeply interconnected, much like different regional dialects of a language, distinct but mutually intelligible. And it's this backdrop of independent, often warring, but culturally linked cities that sets the stage for one of humanity's earliest and most enduring tales. A story of a legendary king from one of these very cities, whose name still echoes through the millennia. Have you ever heard a story that felt so ancient, so deeply rooted in the human experience, that it seemed to emerge from the very dawn of time? We just explored the bustling, often combative world of the Sumerian city-states, each a microcosm of early civilization. Now imagine within one of those very cities, Uruk, a king whose name resonated so powerfully that his deeds, real or imagined, were etched into clay tablets and recounted for thousands of years. This brings us to Gilgamesh's epic journey, arguably the world's oldest surviving epic poem, a narrative that gives us an unparalleled window into the values, fears, and hopes of this ancient people. It's truly astonishing, isn't it, to think that humanity's first great work of literature wasn't some dry historical account, but a thrilling tale of friendship, adventure, and the universal quest for immortality. Historians still argue whether Gilgamesh was a real historical king of Uruk, reigning sometime around 2700–2500 BCE, or if he was a purely mythical figure, a composite of heroic ideals. Regardless, the epic itself is undeniably real, a treasure trove of early human thought. The story, pieced together from various cuneiform tablets found primarily in the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, introduces us to Gilgamesh, a powerful, often arrogant, king of Uruk. He's described as 2/3 god and 1/3 man, blessed with extraordinary strength and beauty, but cursed with a tyrannical nature that oppresses his people. He rules with an iron fist, taking what he desires and working his subjects to exhaustion, building Uruk's mighty walls. His people, desperate for relief, appeal to the gods, who respond by creating Enkidu, a wild man raised among animals in the wilderness, intended to be Gilgamesh's equal and hopefully his foil. Imagine this wild man, untamed and pure, entering the highly structured urban world of Uruk. It's like a prehistoric version of The Jungle Book meets Game of Thrones. The initial encounter between Gilgamesh and Enkidu is, predictably, a violent one. A wrestling match that lasts for hours, showcasing their immense strength. But instead of enmity, this fierce contest for supremacy forges a profound and unexpected bond. They become the closest of friends, a testament to the power of shared experience, even if that experience is a brutal fistfight. With Enkidu by his side, Gilgamesh undergoes a transformation. His arrogance begins to wane, replaced by a yearning for glory that benefits not just himself, but also his beloved friend. Together, they embark on a series of daring adventures, starting with a journey to the cedar forest to confront Humbaba, its monstrous guardian, appointed by the god Enlil. This isn't just a simple monster hunt, it's a dangerous expedition into the unknown, a test of their courage and their newly forged bond. Their triumph over Humbaba brings them immense fame, but also draws the wrath of the gods. The epic takes a tragic turn when the goddess Ishtar, smitten with Gilgamesh's heroic deeds, proposes marriage. When he scornfully rejects her, listing her previous lover's misfortunes, she unleashes the terrifying bull of heaven upon Uruk as an act of divine retribution. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, in a display of their combined might, manage to slay the celestial beast, further infuriating the gods. The divine council convenes, and in their infinite wisdom, or perhaps just spite, they decree that one of the heroes must die as punishment for their hubris and transgressions. Tragically, it is Enkidu, the wild man, the pure soul, who succumbs to a lingering illness, a cruel death that leaves Gilgamesh utterly devastated. The poignant laments of Gilgamesh over his dying friend are some of the most moving passages in ancient literature, showcasing raw grief and the crushing realization of human mortality. It's a reminder that even the strongest, most godlike figures grapple with loss, a truly timeless theme. Enkidu's death shatters Gilgamesh's world and forces him to confront his own mortality, plunging him into an existential crisis. He becomes obsessed with the idea of escaping death, embarking on a desperate, solitary quest for eternal life. He journeys to the ends of the earth, crossing terrifying mountains and vast waters, seeking Utnapishtim, the only mortal granted immortality by the gods, the faraway one who survived the great flood. This arduous journey is not just physical, it's a spiritual one, forcing Gilgamesh to face his deepest fears and to confront the limitations of human power. His encounter with Utnapishtim, who recounts the story of the flood, a narrative strikingly similar to the biblical account, offers no easy answers. Gilgamesh learns that immortality is not for mortals, and that true legacy lies not in defying death, but in living a life of purpose and building something enduring. He returns to Uruk, a changed man, having accepted his fate and now determined to be a wise and just ruler, forever remembered not for conquering death, but for the magnificent walls he built and the wisdom he gained. The epic, in its quiet conclusion, suggests that true heroism might be found not in grand adventures, but in the acceptance of life's fleeting nature and the dedication to one's community, a profound message that still resonates today. Imagine for a moment if, after all those fiercely independent city-states we just discussed, a single dominant power suddenly emerged, sweeping across the land and uniting them all under one banner. It would be a monumental shift, wouldn't it? This is precisely what happened with the Akkadian unification, a pivotal moment in Mesopotamian history marked by the extraordinary rise of Sargon of Akkad, often credited with creating the world's first true empire. Remember how Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, learned about mortality and the lasting power of monumental construction? Well, Sargon's ambition was to build a legacy that dwarfed even the mightiest city walls, to create an empire that would endure beyond his lifetime, leading to a short-lived, yet incredibly influential First Empire. Historians still argue whether Sargon's success was primarily due to his military genius, his administrative innovations, or a combination of both factors that allowed him to overcome the entrenched independence of the Sumerian city-states. Before Sargon, Mesopotamia was a patchwork of warring city-states, a land of constant skirmishes and shifting alliances. There had been attempts at regional dominance, but none had managed to create a lasting unified state across the entire plain. Sargon, whose origins are shrouded in legend, often depicted as a man of humble beginnings, found abandoned in a basket on the river, much like a certain later biblical figure, rose from obscurity to become cupbearer to the king of Kish. It's a classic rags to riches tale, one that probably resonated deeply even in ancient times, proving that sometimes, even in the most rigid societies, an outsider can truly shake things up. His exact chronology is debated, but he likely reigned from around 2334 to 2279 BCE, a period of intense transformation. Sargon's genius lay not just in his military prowess, though he was undoubtedly a brilliant general, but also in his innovative approach to governance. He built a new capital, Akkad, whose exact location remains one of history's great archaeological mysteries. Imagine losing an entire capital city. From there, he launched a series of campaigns that systematically conquered the Sumerian city-states, one by one, extending his control from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He dismantled the old system of independent rulers and replaced them with governors loyal to him, often his own family members or trusted officials. This wasn't just about winning battles. It was about establishing a new administrative framework to hold his vast new territories together. He unified standards of weights and measures, promoting trade and economic integration across his burgeoning empire. It was, in many ways, the first attempt at truly centralized control on such a grand scale, a radical departure from the independent city-state model. Perhaps one of Sargon's most significant innovations was the establishment of a standing army. Unlike the previous system, where city-states relied on levies of citizen soldiers who would return to their farms after a campaign, Sargon maintained a professional fighting force, always ready for battle. This gave him an unparalleled advantage, allowing him to respond quickly to rebellions and project power far beyond Akkad's immediate vicinity. Imagine the logistical nightmare of feeding and equipping such a force in the ancient world. It was an incredible feat of organization. He also leveraged the power of propaganda, commissioning monumental art and inscriptions that glorified his conquests and portrayed him as a divinely chosen ruler, ensuring his name and deeds would echo through time. This was history's first major PR campaign, essentially. The Akkadian Empire, while impressive in its scope, was also a delicate balancing act. Governing such a vast and diverse territory, comprised of peoples speaking different languages, Sumerian and Akkadian, and with long traditions of independence, was a constant challenge. Sargon's successors, particularly his grandson Naram-Sin, continued to expand the empire and consolidate its power, with Naram-Sin even daring to proclaim himself a god, an unprecedented act that further emphasized the imperial ideology. The stele of Naram-Sin, depicting him as a triumphant horned deity trampling his enemies, is a powerful visual testament to the height of Akkadian imperial ambition. However, the very centralization that made Akkad strong also made it vulnerable. Rebellions were frequent, and maintaining control required constant military campaigns, draining resources and stretching the empire thin. This period, despite its brevity, left an indelible mark on Mesopotamian history, proving that unity, even enforced, was possible. But the question that lingered was, how long could such a unified state truly last against internal dissent and external pressures? A question that would soon be answered in a rather abrupt and dramatic fashion. Imagine an empire, seemingly invincible, its monuments reaching for the sky, its armies unchallenged, suddenly crumbling under a mysterious external force. It's a scenario that has played out repeatedly throughout history, leaving behind more questions than answers. We just witnessed the incredible rise of the Akkadian Empire under Sargon and Naram-Sin, a groundbreaking experiment in centralized rule. But their dominion, despite its power, was remarkably short-lived, paving the way for the Gutian invasion's shadow, a period of chaos and obscurity that followed the mysterious downfall of Akkad. It's a historical enigma, really, leaving historians to still argue whether the collapse was primarily due to internal rebellions and administrative overstretch, or if it was the direct result of sustained pressure from the Guti and other external groups. The Akkadian Empire, for all its innovations, began to show cracks under Naram-Sin's successors. The vastness of the empire, coupled with the need to constantly suppress internal revolts, put an immense strain on its resources and its administrative capacity. The very act of governing such a diverse collection of peoples, accustomed to their independent city-states, was a continuous struggle. Imagine trying to keep everyone happy and obedient across an area larger than many modern countries, without the benefit of instant communication or rapid transportation. It was a logistical nightmare just waiting for a catalyst. That catalyst, according to traditional historical accounts, came in the form of the Guti, a fierce, nomadic people from the Zagros Mountains to the east. They were often described by the Mesopotamians as barbaric, uncivilized, and ruthless, a stark contrast to the sophisticated urban dwellers of the plain. While historical texts from the Akkadian period are frustratingly vague about the specifics of their incursions, later Sumerian laments speak of the Guti sweeping down from the mountains like a destructive force, disrupting trade, destroying cities, and bringing widespread famine. They were, in essence, the ancient world's boogeymen, the unpredictable wild card from the untamed highlands. The period following the fall of Akkad, often referred to as the Dark Age of Mesopotamia, saw a significant decline in centralized authority. The Guti, if they truly were the primary cause, didn't establish a coherent empire themselves. Rather, their presence seems to have been more disruptive than constructive. They ruled primarily through raiding and demanding tribute, leading to a period of fragmented power where the great cities of Sumer once again asserted their independence, but often found themselves under the shadow of these mountain tribesmen. Imagine returning to a world where central authority has vanished and local warlords or tribal chiefs hold sway, making daily life incredibly precarious and uncertain. It sounds less like a civilization and more like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie, doesn't it? Archaeological evidence from this period supports the idea of widespread disruption. There's a noticeable decrease in monumental building projects, a decline in long-distance trade, and signs of depopulation in some areas. The sophisticated administrative systems of the Akkadians appear to have largely broken down, and the intricate network of canals, so vital for agriculture, may have fallen into disrepair due to a lack of centralized maintenance. This environmental decay, possibly exacerbated by climate change like a severe drought, is another factor historians still consider in the collapse, leading to a complex interplay of environmental stress and external invasion. It's a grim reminder that even the most advanced societies can be vulnerable to environmental shifts and the unpredictable forces of nature, or in this case, nomadic raiders. However, it's important to remember that this dark age wasn't a complete void of civilization. While central power collapsed, some Sumerian city-states managed to weather the storm, maintaining a degree of autonomy and cultural continuity, even if under duress. Figures like Gudea of Lagash, who reigned during this tumultuous period, are known through their many statues and inscriptions, which depict him as a pious ruler dedicated to rebuilding temples and promoting prosperity within his city. These local rulers acted as beacons in the darkness, preserving aspects of Sumerian culture and laying the groundwork for a future resurgence. They remind us that even in periods of collapse, human resilience and the desire for order often persist. The Guti shadow, while pervasive, wasn't eternal, and the seeds of a new Sumerian renaissance were already being sown, preparing for a spectacular, if brief, comeback. Imagine a land that has been under the thumb of foreign invaders, its once proud cities diminished, its grand traditions suppressed, and then, slowly but surely, it rises again, reclaiming its heritage and establishing a new golden age. This phoenix-like rebirth is precisely what happened in Mesopotamia following the Guti interlude, ushering in the Ur-III Renaissance, a period of powerful resurgence for Sumerian culture and centralized rule. Remember how we discussed the disruptive shadow of the Guti, those mountain tribes who seemingly brought chaos after the fall of Akkad? Well, the Guti's grip on Mesopotamia was never truly absolute, and while they caused significant upheaval, they didn't completely extinguish the flame of Sumerian civilization. Historians still argue whether this resurgence was a direct reaction to Guti misrule, or if it was an inevitable cyclical return to centralized power following a period of fragmentation. The first stirrings of this renaissance came from the south, from the city-states that had managed to retain some semblance of independence during the Guti period, such as Uruk and Lagash. It was a local king, Utu-Hegal of Uruk, who is credited with finally expelling the Guti from Sumer around 2119 BCE. His victory was a rallying cry, liberating the land from what was perceived as a barbaric occupation and setting the stage for the return of native rule. Think of it as a moment of profound national pride, a collective sigh of relief after generations of uncertainty. Utu-Hegal's triumph, however, was swiftly followed by the rise of a new dynasty, one that would truly define this period, the third dynasty of Ur, or Ur-III. The founder of the Ur-III dynasty was Ur-Nammu, a brilliant military leader and administrator who originally served Utu-Hegal. After consolidating his power, Ur-Nammu moved the capital back to the ancient city of Ur, symbolizing a return to Sumerian roots and traditions. His reign, beginning around 2112 BCE, marked the start of a period of unprecedented prosperity, order, and cultural revival. He didn't just conquer, he organized, he built, and he codified. Ur-Nammu saw himself not merely as a king, but as a shepherd of his people, divinely appointed to restore justice and harmony to the land. This wasn't just about winning battles. It was about establishing a stable, well-governed society, proving that the lessons from the Akkadian Empire about centralized administration had been learned and perhaps improved upon. The Ur-III period was characterized by a highly centralized and bureaucratic government, arguably even more so than the Akkadian Empire. The kings of Ur-III, particularly Ur-Nammu and his successor Shulgi, oversaw a vast administrative machine. They implemented a standardized tax system, collected tribute from conquered territories, and controlled vast state-run enterprises, including agriculture, manufacturing, and trade. Imagine a complex web of scribes and officials meticulously documenting every transaction, every grain of barley, every head of livestock. It makes modern tax season look like a walk in the park. This meticulous record-keeping, often in the Sumerian language, which experienced a significant revival during this period, despite Akkadian being widely spoken, has provided historians with an incredible wealth of information about the economy and society of the time. One of the most visible symbols of Ur-III's power and piety was the extensive building program undertaken by its kings. Ur-Nammu, in particular, was a prolific builder, commissioning the construction and restoration of numerous temples and ziggurats throughout his realm. The most famous of these is the Great Ziggurat of Ur, a massive, awe-inspiring step tower dedicated to the moon god Nana. Even today, its imposing ruins stand as a testament to the engineering prowess and spiritual devotion of the Ur-III dynasty. These monumental structures weren't just religious centers. They were statements of power, demonstrating the king's ability to command vast resources and labor, and reinforcing his divine legitimacy. It was like putting up a giant billboard saying, "We're back, and we're bigger and better than ever." The Ur-III state also maintained a formidable standing army, allowing it to project its power and defend its borders. But unlike the Akkadians, who often relied on military might alone, the Ur-III kings also emphasized justice and social welfare. This commitment to legal order, exemplified by the compilation of what is considered the oldest known law code, sets the Ur-III period apart and provides a fascinating glimpse into their concept of a just society. Imagine living in a society where, for the first time, the rules weren't just whispered down through generations or decided on a whim by a powerful ruler, but were actually written down for all to see. This monumental shift towards legal codification is what makes the Code of Ur-Nammu so revolutionary, marking a critical step in the development of justice and social order. We just explored the powerful resurgence of the Ur-III dynasty, a period defined by its centralized administration and ambitious building projects. Remember how Ur-Nammu, the dynasty's founder, was described not just as a conqueror, but as a shepherd of his people, deeply committed to justice and welfare. His compilation of this law code, predating the more famous Code of Hammurabi by several centuries, is a concrete manifestation of that commitment, providing immense insights into the societal values and legal structures of the time. Historians still argue whether its primary purpose was truly to establish justice for all, or if it was more a tool of royal propaganda and administrative efficiency. Dating back to approximately 2100 to 2050 BCE, the Code of Ur-Nammu is the oldest known surviving law code from Mesopotamia, predating Hammurabi's by about 300 years. While only fragments of the original stelae or tablets have been recovered, enough has been deciphered to reveal its structure and content. Unlike later, more extensive codes, the Code of Ur-Nammu is relatively concise, but its existence alone speaks volumes about the sophistication of the Ur-3 state. It was not just a collection of ad hoc rules. It was a systematic attempt to establish a uniform legal framework across a vast and diverse empire, a testament to the administrative ambition of the Ur-3 kings. Imagine the sheer effort involved in gathering existing customs, formalizing them, and then disseminating them throughout the realm. It was a bureaucratic feat of epic proportions. The prologue to the code is particularly fascinating. It begins by invoking the gods, especially Nana, the moon god, patron deity of Ur, and Utu, the sun god associated with justice, affirming that Ur-Nammu was divinely chosen to bring justice and order to the land. It speaks of his efforts to establish equity, to protect the vulnerable, the orphan, the widow, the poor, and to ensure fair dealings among his subjects. This emphasis on protecting the weakest members of society is a recurring theme in ancient Mesopotamian law codes and reflects a foundational aspect of their social contract. It's a bit like a modern political campaign promise, but carved in stone and presumably actually enforced. The prologue also details Ur-Nammu's efforts to standardize weights and measures, a pragmatic step that facilitated trade and ensured fairness in commercial transactions across his empire, further demonstrating his commitment to economic order. The laws themselves, or at least the ones we have, primarily deal with compensatory justice, rather than the eye for an eye retribution often associated with later codes like Hammurabi's. For instance, if a man caused injury to another, such as breaking a bone, the penalty was typically a monetary fine rather than a retaliatory physical punishment. This suggests a legal system that prioritized restitution and reconciliation over strict vengeance, which is a surprising and rather enlightened approach for such an early period. Imagine being able to settle a broken arm with a payment, rather than losing an arm yourself. It certainly sounds more civilized, doesn't it? The code also addresses issues like false accusations, divorce, sorcery, and property damage, providing insights into the daily concerns and social norms of Earthware society. The very act of codifying laws had profound implications. Firstly, it brought a degree of transparency and predictability to the legal system. Citizens, theoretically, could now know what was expected of them and what the consequences of their actions would be. This reduced arbitrary rulings and promoted a sense of fairness. Secondly, it strengthened the authority of the central government, as the king was the ultimate source and enforcer of these laws, binding his vast territories together under a common legal umbrella. Thirdly, it served as a powerful tool of propaganda, showcasing the king as a just and benevolent ruler, divinely sanctioned to maintain cosmic order on earth. The widespread display of these codes, even if only the literate elite could fully understand them, would have reinforced the king's legitimacy and commitment to the welfare of his subjects. The Code of Ur-Nammu, while not as comprehensive as its later successors, laid a crucial foundation, demonstrating that a well-ordered society required not just military might and economic prowess, but also a clear and accessible system of justice. It was an ambitious step towards a truly governed realm. But even the most well-regulated empires face external threats, and the Ur-III dynasty would soon learn that its carefully constructed order was far from impervious to the unpredictable forces lurking beyond its borders. Imagine a meticulously constructed sandcastle, its turrets reaching high, its moats perfectly dug, suddenly facing the relentless tide. That's a bit like what happened to the powerful Ur-III empire we just discussed, an empire that not only achieved remarkable centralized control and codified laws, but also saw a significant Sumerian cultural renaissance. Their reign, however, was not destined to last forever, eventually succumbing to the Elamite incursion, describing the external pressures that ultimately led to Ur-III's collapse. It's a sobering reminder that even the most well-organized and seemingly invincible empires are vulnerable to external forces and internal decay. Historians still argue whether the final blow from the Elamites was the sole reason for the empire's demise, or if it merely accelerated an already ongoing internal decline due to famine, administrative overstretch, or economic woes. The Ur-III Empire, under kings like Shulgi, Ur-Nammu's successor, had reached its zenith, extending its influence across much of Mesopotamia and into parts of Elam itself. But maintaining such a vast and centralized state was an enormous undertaking. The sheer administrative burden, the constant need to collect taxes, manage resources, and oversee an extensive bureaucracy put immense strain on the system. Furthermore, there were signs of internal weakness. A growing number of economic texts suggest difficulties in agricultural production, possibly due to environmental factors like changes in river courses or salinization of the soil, which could have led to widespread famine. A hungry populace is rarely a happy or compliant one, and signs of social unrest, though subtle, can be discerned in the administrative records of the time. Against this backdrop of growing internal strain, external pressures began to mount. To the west, nomadic groups known as the Amorites, or Matu in Sumerian texts, were increasingly infiltrating Mesopotamia, sometimes peacefully, as pastoralists seeking grazing lands, but often aggressively, disrupting trade routes and raiding settlements. The Ur-III kings built massive defensive walls, like the Wall of Martu, to try and keep them out, a testament to the perceived threat. Imagine a giant wall stretching for miles, built not to keep out mythical monsters, but actual people, a clear sign of persistent anxiety and resource drain. While the Amorites contributed to the overall instability, the decisive blow came from the east. That blow originated from Elam, an ancient civilization located in what is now southwestern Iran. Elam had a long and complex relationship with Mesopotamia, marked by periods of both conflict and cultural exchange. While often under Mesopotamian influence, Elam was also a formidable power in its own right, with its own distinct language and culture. As the Ur-III Empire weakened, the Elamites, led by rulers of the Shimashki dynasty, saw an opportunity to assert their independence and expand their own power. This wasn't a sudden, isolated attack. It was a culmination of centuries of geopolitical tension finally boiling over. The end came swiftly and brutally. Around 2004 BCE, a combined force of Elamites and the nomadic Sioux people, another group from the Zagros Mountains, launched a devastating attack on the heart of the Ur-III Empire. The capital city of Ur, once the proud center of a vast realm, fell after a prolonged siege. The city was plundered, its temples desecrated, and its population scattered. The last king of Ur-Thur, Ibisin, was captured and carried off to Elam, never to be seen again. The Lament for Ur, a poignant Sumerian poem composed after the city's destruction, vividly describes the horror of the event. Houses filled with dead, grain stores plundered, and the holy places laid waste. It's a truly heartbreaking account, a poetic elegy for a fallen empire. The collapse of the Ur-III Empire marked the definitive end of the Sumerian period of Mesopotamian history as a dominant political force. While the Sumerian language and many aspects of their culture continued to exert influence, especially in religious and scholarly contexts, their political independence and imperial ambitions were gone for good. The fall of Ur created a power vacuum in Mesopotamia, ushering in a period of fragmentation once again. But this time, the stage was set for new players to rise. The old order had been irrevocably shattered, and from the ashes of Ur, new contenders would emerge, eager to fill the void, leading to the eventual rise of a city that would one day become synonymous with the very idea of a grand ancient empire. Imagine a dynamic chessboard where, after one powerful player is unexpectedly knocked off, numerous smaller pieces begin vying for supremacy, each with their own cunning strategies and grand ambitions. This is precisely the scenario that unfolded in Mesopotamia after the dramatic collapse of the Ur-III Empire, paving the way for the old Babylonian ascendancy. Remember how we just saw the Elamite invasion decisively end Sumerian imperial power, leaving a significant political vacuum. This wasn't a return to the unified, centralized control of Ur-Thrun. Instead, it ushered in a complex period of shifting alliances and competing city-states, setting the stage for the pivotal reign of Hammurabi. Historians still argue whether this period of fragmented power was truly chaotic, or if it allowed for localized cultural and economic development that laid the groundwork for future stability. The immediate aftermath of Ur-Thrun's fall saw Mesopotamia splinter into a mosaic of independent city-states, each led by powerful local dynasties. This period, often called the Isin-Lhasa period, named after two prominent rival cities, was characterized by intense competition for control over key trade routes, agricultural lands, and especially for the symbolic mantle of King of Sumer and Akkad, a title that conferred immense prestige but often little actual authority over distant rivals. It was a bit like a perpetual game of musical chairs, but with armies and ziggurats instead of actual chairs. Cities like Isin, Larsa, Eshnunna, and Mari rose to prominence, each attempting to recreate a semblance of the former Ur-Nammu order, often through military conquest and complex diplomatic maneuvering. One of the most significant developments of this period was the increasing influence of the Amorites. Remember those nomadic groups we mentioned who were pressing on the borders of the Ur-3 Empire? After the empire's collapse, they became even more prominent, gradually settling in Mesopotamia and establishing their own dynasties in many of the newly independent city-states. While initially perceived as outsiders, these Amorite rulers quickly adopted Mesopotamian cultural practices, including the Sumerian and Akkadian languages. Though Akkadian was becoming increasingly dominant, the cuneiform script and the worship of Mesopotamian gods. This wasn't a hostile takeover in the traditional sense. It was more of a gradual assimilation and power shift, a bit like watching a new management team come in, adopt the old company's values, but still run things their own way. Among these rising Amorite-led city-states was a city located on the Euphrates River that had, until this point, been a relatively minor player: Babylon. Its strategic location, commanding vital trade routes, gave it an inherent advantage, but its true ascendance wouldn't come until the sixth king of its Amorite dynasty, Hammurabi. Hammurabi, who reigned from approximately 1792 to 1750 BCE, began his rule as king of a relatively small and unremarkable kingdom. His early years were spent consolidating power within his immediate vicinity, building fortifications, and carefully observing the political landscape. He was a master diplomat, forming alliances and patiently waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Imagine him like a shrewd chess player, meticulously planning his moves while his rivals squabbled amongst themselves. Hammurabi's rise was not a sudden explosion of conquest, but a methodical campaign that showcased his remarkable strategic acumen. For the first 2 decades of his reign, he focused on internal development, strengthening his kingdom's infrastructure and military, and cultivating a reputation as a wise and just ruler. Then, when the political wind shifted and his rivals were weakened by their own endless conflicts, Hammurabi unleashed his forces. He systematically conquered his neighbors, one by one, incorporating their territories into his growing empire. He defeated Larsa, then Eshnunna, and finally Mari, extending Babylonian control across much of Mesopotamia, from the Persian Gulf to the city of Assur in the north. Hammurabi's conquests were more than just military victories. They were carefully integrated into a new, centralized administration. He didn't simply smash and grab, he built. He restored temples, maintained irrigation systems, and established a network of loyal officials to govern his new territories. He styled himself as a shepherd to his people, a champion of justice, and a restorer of order to a land that had suffered from fragmentation. This careful blending of military might, administrative skill, and a powerful ideology of justice would culminate in his most enduring legacy, something that would resonate throughout legal history and become synonymous with his name. He was establishing a new, powerful order, proving that even after the collapse of one empire, another could rise, often grander and more influential, built on both the lessons learned and the ambitions of its new leaders. Imagine a time when justice wasn't just a concept, but a visible public declaration, carved in stone for all to witness, outlining the rights and responsibilities of every citizen, from the highest noble to the lowest commoner. This is the enduring power of Hammurabi's law legacy, a comprehensive legal code that solidified his reign and left an indelible mark on future societies. We just chronicled Hammurabi's strategic rise, how he, as king of Babylon, meticulously conquered and unified much of Mesopotamia. Now, we delve into the cornerstone of his rule, the Code of Hammurabi, a document so famous it often overshadows his military achievements, leading historians to still argue whether its primary purpose was to be a practical legal manual for daily use, or more, a monumental statement of the king's divine authority and commitment to justice, meant primarily for display. While the Code of Ur-Nammu, which we discussed earlier, holds the title of the oldest known law code, Hammurabi's Code, compiled around 1754 BC, is by far the most complete and best preserved, discovered on a magnificent diorite stele over 2 meters tall. Imagine seeing this imposing black stone, covered top to bottom with dense cuneiform script, with an image of Hammurabi himself receiving the laws from Shamash, the sun god and god of justice, at its apex. It's a powerful visual statement, isn't it? It immediately tells you that these aren't just the king's rules. They are divine commandments, imbued with sacred authority. This strategic religious framing was key to Hammurabi's consolidation of power, ensuring that his laws carried immense moral and spiritual weight, making them far more difficult to challenge. The Code of Hammurabi is truly comprehensive, covering almost every aspect of daily life in ancient Babylonian society. It comprises 282 laws dealing with a vast array of subjects: family law, marriage, divorce, inheritance, property law, land, houses, slaves, commercial law, contracts, debts, interest rates, and criminal law, theft, assault, murder. It even includes regulations for specific professions, such as doctors, with fees and penalties for malpractice, and builders, holding them responsible for structural failures. Imagine if modern builders were held to that standard. This level of detail provides an unparalleled glimpse into the social and economic structure of the old Babylonian period, revealing a highly stratified society with distinct classes: the Awilu, free persons; the Mushkanu, dependents or commoners, often associated with the palace or temple; and the Wadu, slaves. One of the most famous aspects of the code is its principle of lex talionis, or an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, particularly in cases of physical injury. While this sounds harsh, it was often applied differently based on social status. For instance, if a free person injured another free person, the penalty might be reciprocal injury. But if a free person injured a mushkanu, or a slave, the penalty was typically a monetary fine. This highlights the hierarchical nature of Babylonian society and shows that justice was not universally applied. However, this principle also served as a limitation on revenge, preventing an escalation of violence beyond the original harm. It essentially said, you get an eye for an eye, not two eyes for an eye, and certainly not a whole family for an eye. It was, in its own way, an attempt to standardize and regulate punitive measures beyond the specific laws. The code's prologue and epilogue are incredibly insightful. The prologue establishes Hammurabi as a just ruler, chosen by the gods to restore order and prosperity, to make justice prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. The epilogue reinforces this image, calling upon future rulers to respect the laws and warning of divine curses for those who dare to alter or disrespect them. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a carefully crafted political statement, a legacy enshrined in stone, intended to project an image of a benevolent and divinely sanctioned ruler for all eternity. The impact of Hammurabi's code reverberated far beyond his reign. It served as a foundational text for later legal systems in Mesopotamia and influenced legal traditions in the ancient Near East for centuries. Its systematic approach to law, its clear articulation of offenses and punishments, and its emphasis on royal justice provided a model for future rulers. It represents a crucial step in the evolution of legal thought, moving away from purely customary law towards a written, public, and centrally enforced system of justice. It was a remarkable achievement, solidifying Hammurabi's empire and shaping the very concept of law in the ancient world. But even the most meticulously crafted legal framework couldn't protect an empire from the unpredictable tides of geopolitical power. And Babylon, despite its newfound grandeur, would soon face a formidable challenge from an unexpected direction, proving that even Hammurabi's great work couldn't legislate against external threats. Imagine a bustling, prosperous capital city, the heart of a vast empire, suddenly falling to an enemy from a distant land, an enemy few had even heard of, leaving devastation in its wake. This is the shocking reality of the Hittite sack of Babylon, an event that abruptly ended old Babylonian dominance and plunged Mesopotamia back into a period of uncertainty. We just marveled at the comprehensive legal legacy of Hammurabi, a code that defined an era and projected an image of eternal order. Yet, even the greatest legal systems cannot protect against all threats, and Babylon, despite its strength, would discover this truth in the most brutal way imaginable. Historians still argue whether this raid was a calculated strategic move by the Hittites or merely an opportunistic, long-distance plundering expedition that had unforeseen consequences for Mesopotamian power dynamics. Following Hammurabi's death, the old Babylonian Empire, while still powerful, began to show signs of strain. His successors, particularly Samsu-Iluna, faced numerous internal rebellions, particularly in the southern regions of Mesopotamia, where the old Sumerian cities often chafed under Babylonian rule. The rebellious region, known as the Sealand, located in the marshy areas of the Persian Gulf, became a persistent thorn in Babylon's side, draining resources and diverting military attention. Meanwhile, the Amorite migrations continued, adding to the demographic and political complexities of the region. Maintaining such a vast and diverse empire was a constant struggle, requiring continuous military campaigns and careful diplomacy, a delicate balancing act that was increasingly difficult to maintain. It was against this backdrop that a new, formidable power emerged far to the northwest, in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, the Hittites. For much of the old Babylonian period, the Hittites were a distant, almost mythical people, known perhaps only through vague trade contacts. Their own kingdom was still in its formative stages, but they were developing into a significant military force, mastering chariot warfare and metallurgy, particularly ironworking, which would give them a technological edge in later centuries. At the time of the sack of Babylon, however, their power was still growing, and their audacious raid deep into Mesopotamia was an unexpected, almost bewildering act of aggression. The Hittite king responsible for this daring exploit was Mursili I. Around 1595 BCE, in an incredible display of strategic ambition and logistical capability, Mursili led his army on an astonishingly long-distance campaign, bypassing numerous intervening kingdoms and hostile territories to strike directly at the heart of the old Babylonian Empire. Imagine an army marching hundreds of miles through deserts and over mountains into unknown lands purely to attack a distant, wealthy city. It was an unprecedented feat of military planning and endurance, making any modern road trip feel like a quick jaunt to the grocery store. The element of surprise, coupled with any internal weaknesses Babylon might have been experiencing, proved decisive. When Mursili's forces finally reached Babylon, the city, perhaps caught off guard or weakened by internal strife, fell. The consequences were devastating. Babylon was not merely conquered, it was thoroughly plundered and sacked. Temples were stripped of their treasures. Statues of gods were carried off as war booty. A deeply symbolic act in ancient Mesopotamia, representing the gods abandoning their city. And the city's infrastructure was likely damaged. The very stele of Hammurabi's code, that proud monument of justice, may have been among the treasures taken, though it was later found in Elam, suggesting a more complex post-sack journey. The Hittites, however, did not intend to occupy Babylon permanently. After their destructive raid, they simply packed up their loot and retreated back to Anatolia, leaving Babylon in ruins and a power vacuum in their wake. It was a smash-and-grab operation on a grand imperial scale. The Hittite sack of Babylon brought about the definitive end of the old Babylonian dynasty and ushered in a period of considerable confusion and political fragmentation in Mesopotamia. The sudden withdrawal of the Hittites left no clear successor power, allowing various local rulers and emerging groups to contend for dominance. This event is a stark reminder of the fragility of even seemingly stable empires and the unpredictable nature of ancient geopolitics. While Babylon would eventually rise again, its brief, catastrophic encounter with the Hittites marked the end of an era and cleared the way for a new, often obscure chapter in Mesopotamia's long and complex history, preparing the stage for yet another group to try their hand at ruling the land. Imagine a vast empire, once the center of the civilized world, suddenly falling silent, its vibrant culture seemingly overshadowed by a new, enigmatic ruling class that dominated for centuries. This is the intriguing, often obscure chapter of the Kassite dynasty's rule in Mesopotamia. We just witnessed the shocking and abrupt end of the old Babylonian Empire with the Hittite sack of Babylon, a devastating raid that left a power vacuum in its wake. Into this void stepped the Kassites, a people whose origins remain somewhat mysterious, who would go on to rule Babylon for an astonishingly long period, yet whose impact on the land is still debated. Historians still argue whether the Kassite period was a dark age of cultural stagnation, or if it represents a sophisticated period of synthesis and adaptation that maintained Mesopotamian traditions while introducing new elements. The period immediately following the Hittite raid, around 1595 BCE, was one of fragmentation and uncertainty in Mesopotamia. With the old Babylonian dynasty shattered and the Hittites having retreated, no single power was strong enough to immediately assert control over the entire region. This instability provided the perfect opportunity for the Kassites to solidify their presence. The Kassites were a people from the Zagros Mountains, much like the Guti before them, who had been gradually infiltrating Mesopotamia for centuries, serving as agricultural laborers, mercenaries, and occasionally even as minor officials within the old Babylonian administration. They were, in essence, already woven into the fabric of Mesopotamian society when the opportunity arose to seize power. Unlike the destructive Guti, the Kassites, once in control, proved to be remarkably adept at adopting and preserving Mesopotamian culture. They established their capital at Dur-Kurigalzu, modern-day Akkad, a new city built near Baghdad, but they meticulously restored temples in older Sumerian and Akkadian cities like Babylon and Nippur. They continued to use the Akkadian language for administration and official inscriptions, even while maintaining their own Kassite language for personal use, a language that, frustratingly for modern scholars, remains largely undeciphered, offering tantalizing hints of a linguistic mystery. This embrace of local traditions contrasts sharply with the earlier, more disruptive invasions, suggesting a more nuanced approach to conquest and governance. It's almost as if they said, "We're in charge now, but we'll keep your paperwork and gods. Thank you very much." The Kassite period, which lasted for approximately 400 years, roughly 1595 to 1155 BCE, is often referred to as the Middle Babylonian period. While less dramatic and well documented than the Old Babylonian era, it was a time of relative stability and economic recovery. The Kassite kings focused on maintaining the elaborate irrigation systems, ensuring agricultural prosperity, and rebuilding the infrastructure that had suffered during the preceding turmoil. They established a system of land grants known as kudurus, which were carved stone stelae that recorded royal land grants and privileges, often adorned with divine symbols and curses against those who would violate the decree. These kudurus are invaluable sources of information about Kassite society, revealing their land tenure system, legal practices, and religious beliefs. Imagine a stone document that not only grants you land, but also promises divine retribution for anyone who messes with it. Quite the deterrent. One of the most notable features of Kassite rule was their close relationship with the temple establishments. They heavily invested in rebuilding and endowing temples, demonstrating piety and cementing their legitimacy in the eyes of their subjects. This symbiotic relationship between king and clergy helped ensure social order and provided a framework for economic activity, as temples often functioned as major economic centers, controlling land, labor, and trade. The Kassites also engaged in extensive diplomatic relations with other major powers of the late Bronze Age, including Egypt, the Hittites, who had ironically started their rule, and the emerging Assyrians, as evidenced by the Amarna letters, which we'll discuss later. These international ties show that despite their somewhat opaque internal history, the Kassites were active players on the geopolitical stage. While not as innovative as the Sumerians or as dramatically impactful as the Old Babylonians, the Kassite dynasty provided a crucial period of continuity and stability for Mesopotamia. They meticulously preserved and transmitted the vast Mesopotamian cultural and intellectual heritage, acting as crucial custodians of a civilization that had already spanned millennia. Their long reign allowed for the slow, steady recovery of the land and its people, ensuring that the flame of Mesopotamian civilization continued to burn, even if its light was sometimes dim. But as always in this region, new powers were constantly on the rise. And to the north, a formidable kingdom was slowly, relentlessly gathering its strength, preparing to challenge the old order. Imagine the ancient Near East not as a collection of isolated kingdoms, but as a vibrant, interconnected web of powerful empires, each vying for influence, sending elaborate gifts, and exchanging diplomatic letters that reveal both their grandeur and their petty squabbles. This is the dynamic world of the late Bronze Age, and central to this intricate tapestry, especially in the north, was the Mitanni kingdom's influence, an often overlooked yet formidable Hurrian power that played a pivotal role in shaping the geopolitics of the era. We just explored the long, stable, but somewhat enigmatic rule of the Kassites in Babylon, who acted as custodians of Mesopotamian culture. Now, our gaze shifts northward to a kingdom whose very name evokes a sense of mystery, a Hurrian state that rose to rival even the mightiest empires. Historians still argue whether the Mitanni's success was primarily due to their mastery of chariot warfare, or their astute diplomatic strategies in balancing the powers of Egypt and Hatti. The Mitanni, a kingdom centered in northern Mesopotamia and Syria, flourished from roughly the 15th to the 13th centuries BCE. Unlike the Sumerians or Akkadians, the Mitanni were a Hurrian-speaking people, an ethnic group whose origins are still debated, but who were distinct from the Semitic and Indo-European groups of the region. What makes them particularly intriguing is the presence of an Indo-Aryan ruling elite within their society, who introduced terms related to horse training and chariot warfare, suggesting a fascinating cultural blend. Imagine a ruling class speaking a different language than their subjects, but effectively governing a complex multi-ethnic state. It's a testament to their administrative flexibility, or perhaps their sheer military dominance. The key to Mitanni power lay in their mastery of chariot warfare. The two-wheeled, horse-drawn chariot was the premier military technology of the late Bronze Age, a devastatingly effective weapon on the battlefield. The Mitanni were exceptional charioteers, deploying large numbers of these mobile platforms, giving them a significant advantage over their rivals. This military superiority allowed them to establish a vast kingdom, controlling a significant portion of northern Mesopotamia and extending their influence westward into Syria, where they often clashed with the burgeoning Egyptian and Hittite empires over vital trade routes and resource-rich territories. Imagine seeing hundreds, even thousands, of these ancient war machines thundering across the plains, an awe-inspiring and terrifying sight. Their rise meant they often found themselves in direct competition with the Hittite Empire to the north and the burgeoning New Kingdom of Egypt to the south. The history of the Late Bronze Age in the Near East is, in many ways, a triangular dance of power between these three great empires: Egypt, Hatti, the Hittites, and Mitanni. They alternately fought fierce wars, signed peace treaties, and engaged in elaborate diplomatic exchanges, often cemented by royal marriages between their ruling families. These were not just symbolic unions, they were strategic alliances aimed at maintaining a balance of power, ensuring that no single empire became too dominant. It's almost like a very ancient, very high-stakes version of alliance building in a strategy game. One of the most valuable sources of information about this period, and particularly about the Mitanni, comes from a remarkable archive of diplomatic correspondence known as the Amarna letters, which we will dive into in more detail in our next section. These clay tablets, discovered in Egypt, contain letters exchanged between the Egyptian pharaohs and various rulers across the Near East, including the kings of Mitanni. They reveal a world of elaborate courtesies, demands for gold, complaints about perceived slights, and urgent appeals for military assistance. They show the Mitanni kings, such as Shutana II and Tushrata, engaging as equals with the mighty pharaohs, negotiating alliances, and sending their daughters to marry into the Egyptian royal family. The Mitanni's influence extended beyond military might and diplomacy. They were also cultural conduits, facilitating the spread of Hurrian religious practices, artistic styles, and specific horse training texts across the Near East. They absorbed elements from both Mesopotamian and Syrian cultures, creating a vibrant synthesis that enriched the broader region. However, like all great powers, their dominance eventually waned. By the 13th century BCE, internal feuds and the relentless pressure from both the Hittites and the newly resurgent Assyrians, another power from northern Mesopotamia, led to their decline and eventual collapse. Their kingdom was ultimately absorbed by its more powerful neighbors, but their legacy, particularly in the realm of international diplomacy and military innovation, left an undeniable mark on the ancient world, proving that even seemingly forgotten empires played crucial roles in the grand narrative of history. Have you ever wondered what ancient international diplomacy looked like? Not the grand treaties carved in stone, but the everyday back and forth, the demands, the compliments, the subtle threats, and the requests for lavish gifts. Well, thanks to a remarkable archaeological discovery, we don't have to wonder. This brings us to the Amarna letters revelations, a trove of clay tablets that truly unpack the diplomatic correspondence, shedding light on late Bronze Age geopolitics. We just discussed the powerful Mitanni kingdom and its role in the intricate balance of power between Egypt, Hatti, and themselves. These very letters are our primary window into that complex world, revealing a level of interconnectedness and sophistication that might surprise you about ancient empires. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of urgency or direct military response evident in some of these letters indicates true Egyptian indifference to its vassal states, or if it reflects a more nuanced, deliberate strategy of non-intervention. The Amarna letters were discovered in 1887 by a local woman in Amarna, Egypt, the site of the ancient Egyptian capital of Akhetaten, built by Pharaoh Akhenaten. This archive consists of over 380 clay tablets, mostly written in Akkadian Cuneiform, the lingua franca, common language, of diplomacy across the ancient Near East at the time. Imagine the shock of finding hundreds of letters from foreign kings, written in a Mesopotamian script, in an Egyptian royal archive. It's like finding a secret stash of diplomatic emails from centuries ago. But instead of digital files, they're tangible clay tablets. The letters span a period of roughly 30 years, primarily during the reigns of Egyptian pharaohs Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun, offering an unparalleled glimpse into the international relations of the 14th century BCE. These aren't dry formal treaties. Oh no, these are lively, often gossipy, and sometimes exasperated exchanges between the great kings of the era: the Pharaoh of Egypt, the king of Hatti, the Hittites, the king of Mitanni, the king of Assyria, and the king of Babylon, the Kassite ruler. Remember them? They refer to each other as my brother, even when making thinly veiled threats or complaining about the quality of gold received. The letters cover a vast range of topics: requests for gold. Egypt was seen as a land of immense wealth. Discussions of royal marriages, used to cement alliances, often with complaints about the dowry or the treatment of princesses. Reciprocal gift exchanges, and urgent pleas for military aid from Egyptian vassal rulers in Syria and Canaan, who were facing various threats, including the enigmatic Apiru, often depicted as outlaws or rebels. One of the most striking aspects of the Amarna letters is the detailed picture they paint of the balance of power during the Late Bronze Age. They clearly show that Egypt, while powerful, was not the sole superpower. The Hittites and Mitanni were formidable rivals, engaging in complex diplomatic maneuvers, shifting alliances, and occasional military clashes. For instance, there are numerous letters from Mitanni kings like Tushratta to the pharaoh discussing alliances against the Hittites, requesting gold, and celebrating royal marriages. Conversely, letters from the Hittite king Suppiluliuma reveal his efforts to undermine Mitanni influence and expand his own control in Syria, setting the stage for the eventual decline of Mitanni. It's a grand geopolitical drama playing out in clay tablets, full of intrigue and ambition. Beyond the great powers, the letters also provide a unique insight into Egypt's relationship with its vassal states in the Levant, modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. These are often desperate pleas from local rulers, figures like Ribhada of Byblos or Abdi-Heber of Jerusalem, begging the pharaoh for troops and resources to defend their cities from encroaching enemies, including the Apiru and other rival city-states. What's often frustrating for modern historians is the apparent lack of strong intervention from Egypt, leading to much scholarly debate. Did Akhenaten, absorbed in his religious reforms, simply neglect foreign affairs? Or was it a deliberate policy to allow local conflicts to weaken potential rivals while maintaining a facade of imperial authority. The letters certainly suggest that many of these local rulers felt abandoned, painting a vivid picture of a crumbling Egyptian hold on its Levantine territories. The Amarna letters are not just historical documents. They are human documents, full of personality and emotion. You can almost hear the exasperation of a pharaoh complaining about the small amount of gold received from Babylon, or the desperation of a vassal ruler seeing his city besieged. They transform our understanding of the ancient world from static empires into a dynamic, interconnected sphere of diplomacy, trade, and occasional warfare. They show that even thousands of years ago, kings were worried about their gold reserves, their international reputation, and whether their allies would actually show up when needed. This detailed glimpse into international relations also highlights the rising regional powers, particularly to the north, who would soon step onto the global stage with unprecedented force. Imagine a place far to the north, where for centuries a resilient people slowly but surely gathered strength, learning from the empires that rose and fell around them, patiently waiting for their moment to dominate the ancient world. This is the story of the Assyrian might awakens, chronicling the gradual, often brutal, rise of Assyria from a regional power to a formidable empire. We just dipped into the fascinating world of late Bronze Age diplomacy through the Amarna letters, where Assyria, though mentioned, was still a comparatively minor player, alongside the likes of Egypt, Hittite, and Mitanni. Now, we turn our attention to the land of Assur, a place that would, over the course of centuries, become synonymous with military prowess and imperial ambition. Historians still argue whether Assyria's relentless expansion was driven primarily by a specific imperial ideology rooted in the worship of Ashur, or by more pragmatic factors like economic necessity and defensive strategies. The origins of Assyria trace back to the city of Assur, located on the Tigris River in northern Mesopotamia. From around the early 2nd millennium BCE, Assur was an important trading center, particularly active in long-distance trade networks, exchanging textiles and tin for silver in Anatolia, as evidenced by the thousands of old Assyrian cuneiform tablets discovered at Kanesh, Kultepe. This early period, often called the Old Assyrian period, saw them establish extensive mercantile colonies and develop a sophisticated commercial infrastructure. They were, in essence, entrepreneurial traders before they became fearsome warriors. It's a rather mundane origin for a future empire known for its military might, isn't it? Like finding out a notorious crime lord started out selling lemonade. During the Middle Bronze Age and into the Late Bronze Age, Assyria experienced fluctuating fortunes. They were at times subjugated by larger powers, notably the Mitanni kingdom, which we discussed earlier. This period of subjugation, however, seems to have instilled in them a fierce determination for independence and a deep-seated military ethos. They absorbed military technologies, learned diplomatic strategies, and honed their administrative skills while under foreign dominion. It was a crucible of learning, forging a people who would eventually turn the tables on their former overlords. The true awakening of Assyrian might begin in the Middle Assyrian period, roughly 1400 to 1000 BCE. After the decline of Mitanni power, partially due to Hittite pressure, as seen in the Amarna letters, Assyrian kings like Ashur-uballit-hosrones, Sati, 1365 to 1330 BCE, seized the opportunity to assert their independence and expand their territory. Ashur-uballit even exchanged letters with the Egyptian pharaoh in the Amarna archive, signifying Assyria's new status as a recognized great power on the international stage. This was a crucial turning point, moving them from regional autonomy to active participation in the complex diplomatic game of the Late Bronze Age. The Middle Assyrian kings who followed, such as Adad-nirari IV, Shalmaneser I, and Tukulti-Ninurta III, were relentless in their campaigns. They systematically conquered neighboring territories, consolidated their control over northern Mesopotamia, and even managed to briefly conquer Babylon, marking a period of direct Assyrian rule over the Kassites. This expansion was driven by a highly disciplined and effective military machine. The Assyrians were masters of siege warfare, employing battering rams and sapping techniques, and they were among the first to use iron weapons on a widespread scale, giving them a technological edge over bronze-equipped adversaries. Their military tactics were often brutal, employing mass deportations and public displays of cruelty to instill terror and deter rebellion, which, while effective in the short term, also bred deep resentment. The Assyrian state was meticulously organized, with a strong central authority centered around the cult of the god Ashur, who was seen as a divine warrior king guiding their conquests. The king was Ashur's earthly representative, and warfare became a religious imperative, a means of expanding Ashur's dominion. This religious zeal, combined with pragmatic military innovation and ruthless efficiency, laid the groundwork for the truly massive empire that would emerge in the subsequent period. The gradual process of expansion, the learning from their earlier subjugation, and the relentless pursuit of military superiority transformed Assyria from a minor trading state into a burgeoning regional power, preparing it for a grander, more dominant role on the world stage, one that would redefine the very concept of empire in the ancient Near East. Imagine a vast, iron-fisted empire stretching from Egypt to Iran, ruling with a combination of unparalleled military might and an administrative sophistication that was terrifyingly efficient. This is the zenith of Assyrian power, the period of Neo-Assyrian dominance, detailing the peak of Assyrian military and administrative power, a time when their name alone could strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. We just saw the gradual awakening of Assyrian might, how they slowly transformed from a trading outpost to a regional power in the Middle Assyrian period. Now, we witness their full, terrifying blossom into the dominant force of the Near East, a period where their iron chariots and siege engines became the instruments of a truly global empire. Historians still argue whether the Neo-Assyrian Empire's use of calculated terror tactics was ultimately effective in long-term control, or if it sowed the seeds of its own destruction through widespread resentment. The Neo-Assyrian period, roughly 911-609 BCE, began with a renewed vigor and an ambition that dwarfed all previous Mesopotamian empires. Kings like Ashurnasirpal II, reigned 883-859 BCE, set the tone for this new era. He was a ruthless warrior and a master of psychological warfare. His annals, meticulously carved on palace walls, describe in chilling detail the cruel fates of those who dared to resist him. Cities razed, populations deported, and rebel leaders flayed and their skins displayed on city walls. This wasn't just random brutality. It was a deliberate strategy of terror designed to break the will of any potential opposition before they even thought of rebellion. Imagine a historical account detailing such gruesome acts, not to condemn them, but to celebrate them as righteous acts of royal power. It certainly puts a different spin on leading by example. Following Ashurnasirpal II, kings like Shalmaneser III, Tiglath-Pileser II, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and Ashurbanipal continued this relentless expansion and consolidation. The Assyrian Empire grew to an unprecedented size, encompassing Mesopotamia, Syria, the Levant, parts of Anatolia, and even, for a time, Egypt itself. This was the largest empire the world had seen up to this point, a true superpower of its age. Their military innovations were key to this success. They perfected the use of combined arms, coordinating infantry, cavalry, and chariot divisions. They developed highly effective siege engines, capable of breaching even the strongest city walls. And they were masters of logistics, capable of sustaining large armies on long campaigns. But the Assyrians were more than just brutal conquerors. They were also brilliant administrators. They developed a sophisticated imperial administration to govern their vast territories. Conquered lands were often organized into provinces, each governed by an appointed official loyal to the king, ensuring direct control and efficient tax collection. They implemented a system of mass deportations, forcibly relocating conquered populations from one part of the empire to another. This wasn't just punitive. It was a deliberate policy to break down local identities, dilute potential rebellious groups, and provide labor for imperial projects. Imagine being uprooted from your ancestral home and moved thousands of miles away, effectively losing your entire cultural context. It's a truly chilling form of social engineering. The Assyrians also invested heavily in infrastructure. They built elaborate road networks to facilitate the rapid movement of troops and communication, establishing a sort of ancient postal service with relay stations. They maintained extensive irrigation systems and oversaw agricultural production to support their massive population and army. Their capital cities, which shifted over time from Assur to Kalhu, Nimrud, Tursharukin, Khorsabad, and finally Nineveh, became centers of imperial power, wealth, and monumental architecture. These cities, especially Nineveh, were designed to impress and intimidate, showcasing the grandeur and might of the Assyrian kings. The Assyrian kings also understood the power of information. They commissioned detailed annals, recording their military campaigns and achievements, and these texts, inscribed on palace walls and clay tablets, served both as historical records and as propaganda, legitimizing their rule and terrifying their enemies. King Ashurbanipal reigned 668–627 BCE, famously established a vast library at Nineveh, collecting thousands of cuneiform tablets from across Mesopotamia. This library, containing myths, epics like the Epic of Gilgamesh, historical records, scientific treatises, and administrative documents, was an unparalleled repository of knowledge and a testament to Assyrian intellectual curiosity. Even amidst their relentless militarism. It's truly ironic, isn't it, that an empire known for its destruction also preserved so much of ancient knowledge. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was a towering achievement of organization and military might, a brutal but effective model of imperial control. However, even the most powerful empires eventually faced their decline, and the very methods that secured Assyrian dominance would ultimately contribute to its dramatic and catastrophic downfall. Imagine a grand fortified capital city, its walls immense, its palaces filled with treasures, its libraries holding the accumulated knowledge of millennia, suddenly besieged by a coalition of enraged enemies, ultimately fallen in a fiery cataclysmic destruction. This is the dramatic and symbolic end of the Nineveh's grandeur, chronicling the magnificent capital and its symbolic destruction. We just detailed the relentless expansion and sophisticated administration of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a vast realm that seemed unstoppable under kings like Ashurbanipal. Yet, even the mightiest empires contain the seeds of their own destruction, and Nineveh, the glittering jewel in the Assyrian crown, would become the epic stage for a final violent act that would reshape the map of the ancient Near East. Historians still argue whether the fall of Nineveh was primarily due to the overwhelming military strength of the attacking coalition, or if internal dissent, civil war, and overextension had already fatally weakened the empire. By the mid-7th century BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, despite its unprecedented power, was beginning to show signs of overextension and internal strain. The constant military campaigns, the vast network of administrators, and the need to suppress frequent rebellions put immense pressure on imperial resources and manpower. While Ashurbanipal's reign saw a peak in cultural and military power, his later years were marked by succession disputes and civil strife among his sons, severely weakening the central authority. The brutal policies of mass deportations and terror, while effective in the short term, also generated deep-seated resentment among conquered peoples, creating a volatile environment just waiting for an opportunity to explode. Imagine an empire built on fear, where every conquered group secretly yearns for its downfall. It's a house of cards, isn't it? The opportunity for retribution came from an unlikely alliance. To the south, in Babylon, a new Chaldean dynasty had been steadily gaining strength, chafing under Assyrian rule. Their leader, Nabopolassar, emerged as a formidable opponent, determined to restore Babylonian independence. To the east, another power was rising, the Medes, an Iranian people who had unified under their king, Cyaxares, and were rapidly expanding their territory and military capabilities. These two long-standing adversaries of Assyria, often at odds themselves, found common ground in their shared hatred of the oppressive Assyrian yoke. It was an alliance forged in desperation and shared vengeance. The final decisive campaign began around 614 BCE, when the Medes, under Cyaxares, launched a devastating assault, capturing the ancient Assyrian capital of Assur. This was not just a military victory, it was a psychological blow, desecrating the very cult center of the god Ashur, the heart of Assyrian religious and imperial identity. Following this victory, the Median and Babylonian forces formally allied, cementing their pact and setting their sights on the ultimate prize, Nineveh, located on the Tigris River, was truly a city of unparalleled grandeur. Under Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, it had been transformed into a sprawling metropolis protected by massive double walls over 12 kilometers in circumference and pierced by 15 gates. Its palaces, adorned with exquisite carved reliefs depicting royal hunts and military triumphs, were filled with priceless treasures. The famous library of Ashurbanipal, with its tens of thousands of clay tablets, represented the pinnacle of Mesopotamian scholarship. It was, in essence, the New York City of the ancient world, immense, powerful, and seemingly unconquerable. Imagine a city so vast and well defended that its fall seemed utterly impossible. It must have instilled an incredible sense of hubris in its inhabitants. The siege of Nineveh, which occurred in 612 BCE, was a brutal affair. The allied Median and Babylonian forces, augmented by Scythian and Sumerian auxiliaries, surrounded the city. Accounts suggest that heavy rains caused the Tigris River to flood, possibly undermining the city's walls or facilitating a breach, a stroke of environmental bad luck for the Assyrians. After a prolonged and desperate struggle, Nineveh fell. The destruction was catastrophic. The city was systematically plundered, burned, and largely razed to the ground. The scale of the devastation was immense, marking a symbolic and physical end to the Assyrian Empire. The prophecies of the Hebrew prophet Nahum, describing Nineveh's impending doom, famously proclaimed, "Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her?" The fall of Nineveh sent shockwaves across the ancient world, proving that even the most formidable empires could be brought to their knees. It was a dramatic and decisive end to Assyrian dominance. And from its ashes, a new power would rise to claim the mantle of imperial glory, ready to restore the grandeur of Babylon. Imagine a city, once reduced to rubble and ash, stripped of its glory, rising from its own ruins to become the most magnificent metropolis of its age, a beacon of culture and power. This is the story of the Neo-Babylonian resurgence, witnessing Babylon's rebirth under the visionary leadership of Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar II. We just recounted the dramatic and devastating fall of Nineveh, the glittering capital of the hated Assyrian Empire, a collapse that sent shockwaves across the ancient world. Now, from the ashes of Assyrian dominance, Babylon, once a pawn in the imperial game, seized its moment to reclaim its ancient prestige and establish an empire of unprecedented splendor, proving that even a thorough defeat is sometimes just a temporary setback for a truly resilient civilization. Historians still argue whether the Neo-Babylonian Empire's short lifespan was inevitable, given the geopolitical shifts, or if internal factors, such as the later reigns of less capable kings, ultimately sealed its fate. The driving force behind this resurgence was Nabopolassar, a Chaldean general who, in the final decades of the Assyrian Empire, had managed to establish an independent kingdom in Babylon. He harbored a deep-seated hatred for the Assyrians, who had oppressed his people for generations. It was Nabopolassar who forged the crucial alliance with the Medes, leading to the destruction of Nineveh and the complete dismantling of the Assyrian state. His victory was not just a military triumph, it was the liberation of Babylon, ending centuries of foreign domination and restoring its rightful place as a major power in Mesopotamia. Imagine the relief and euphoria in Babylon as news of Nineveh's fall spread. It must have been like an entire nation letting out a collective sigh of freedom. Upon the final collapse of Assyria, the vast territorial gains of the former empire were divided between the victorious Medes and Babylonians. The Medes took the northern and eastern portions, while the Neo-Babylonian Empire inherited the rich lands of Mesopotamia, Syria, and the Levant. This vast territory, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt, formed the basis of the new empire, giving Babylon access to immense resources and strategic trade routes. Nabopolassar laid the groundwork for this new imperial age, but it was his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, who would truly elevate Babylon to legendary status. Nebuchadnezzar II reigned from approximately 605 to 562 BCE, a remarkably long and prosperous period. He was a brilliant military commander, completing his father's conquests and solidifying Babylonian control over the newly acquired territories. He campaigned extensively in the Levant, famously conquering the kingdom of Judah and destroying Jerusalem in 586 BCE, leading to the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, an event profoundly significant in biblical history. These military campaigns secured the empire's borders and ensured a steady flow of tribute and resources back to the capital. He was a force to be reckoned with, truly an unstoppable imperial machine in his prime. But Nebuchadnezzar's most enduring legacy lies in his extraordinary building program in Babylon. He embarked on an ambitious project to transform his capital into the most magnificent city in the ancient world, surpassing even the legendary Nineveh. He rebuilt temples, palaces, and fortifications on a colossal scale. The city became a true marvel of ancient engineering and artistry. Imagine massive walls, famously wide enough for 2 chariots to race abreast on top, protecting the city. The Ishtar Gate, adorned with vibrant blue-glazed bricks and intricate depictions of lions, dragons, and bulls, was one of its 8 monumental entrances, a dazzling testament to Babylonian artistry and power. You can still see reconstructed sections of it today, and they are absolutely breathtaking, making you feel tiny in comparison to the grandeur of antiquity. At the heart of the city rose the monumental Etemenanki, the ziggurat dedicated to the patron god Marduk, believed by some to be the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel. This colossal step tower, reaching towards the heavens, was a symbol of Babylonian piety and imperial ambition. And of course, there were the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a legendary terraced garden supposedly built by Nebuchadnezzar for his homesick Median wife. Whether they truly existed or were merely a poetic embellishment of other extensive gardens, they symbolize the perceived luxury and botanical wonders of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. This wasn't just rebuilding, it was a conscious effort to create a city that would awe and inspire, a true center of a resurgent empire. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, while relatively short-lived compared to some of its predecessors, was a brilliant but fleeting moment of Mesopotamian imperial glory, a final magnificent flourish before the arrival of a new, even larger power from the east. Imagine a wonder so magnificent, so breathtakingly beautiful, that even in the ancient world, It was counted among the few legendary achievements of human engineering. This is the realm of the Hanging Gardens mystery, exploring one of the seven wonders of the ancient world and the ongoing debate about its existence. We just marveled at the Neo-Babylonian resurgence, specifically Nebuchadnezzar II's ambition to transform Babylon into the most splendid city on earth, rebuilding its walls, gates, and the towering ziggurat of Etemenanki. It's fitting, then, that associated with his reign is perhaps the most romantic and elusive of all ancient architectural achievements. A structure that whispers of verdant terraces and cascading water in a dry land. Historians still argue whether the Hanging Gardens were a real construction in Babylon, a marvel of ancient engineering, or if they were largely a poetic embellishment, perhaps inspired by other elaborate gardens in the region, particularly those in Assyria. The tale of the Hanging Gardens centers on Nebuchadnezzar II, the powerful Neo-Babylonian king, and his supposed motivation for building them. The story, as recounted by later Greek historians like Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, claims that Nebuchadnezzar constructed these elaborate terraced gardens for his homesick Median wife, Amytis. Allegedly, she longed for the mountainous landscapes of her homeland, a stark contrast to the flat, alluvial plains of Mesopotamia. To cheer her, the king supposedly created an artificial mountain covered in lush greenery, a horticultural paradise in the heart of the desert. Imagine the sheer dedication and perhaps a touch of desperate romanticism required to undertake such a colossal project for the sake of one person's comfort. The descriptions, though varying in detail, paint a picture of multi-tiered terraces supported by massive stone arches, rising to a considerable height. These terraces were supposedly filled with vast quantities of soil to support large trees, shrubs, and flowering plants, watered by an ingenious irrigation system that drew water from the Euphrates River, perhaps using a complex chain pump mechanism. The idea of lush green waterfalls in the arid Mesopotamian landscape is certainly captivating, a stark contrast to the often dusty and sun-baked ancient cities. This vision has captured the imaginations of artists and writers for centuries, becoming almost synonymous with the opulence of ancient Babylon. However, here's where the mystery truly deepens. Despite extensive archaeological excavations in Babylon, there has been no definitive archaeological evidence of the Hanging Gardens. No foundational structures, no irrigation systems, no textual references from Babylonian sources contemporary with Nebuchadnezzar II that explicitly describe such a structure have been found. This is a significant point, especially given the meticulous record-keeping of the Babylonians and the sheer scale of Nebuchadnezzar's other building projects, which are well documented. You'd think building one of the seven wonders would merit a mention in the royal chronicles, wouldn't you? It's like building the Eiffel Tower and only having tourist brochures describe it centuries later. This lack of evidence has led scholars to several theories. One prominent theory suggests that the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon at all, but rather in Nineveh, the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian king, Sennacherib, reigned 705-681 BCE, famously built an elaborate palace garden with an ingenious aqueduct system at Nineveh, which contemporary Assyrian texts to describe in detail. Perhaps later, Greek historians, who lived centuries after the fall of both empires, conflated the two cities, or attributed the Assyrian achievement to the more famous Babylon. It's entirely plausible given the general confusion and romanticization of ancient history by later writers. Imagine if a future civilization confused the Golden Gate Bridge with the Brooklyn Bridge. Similar concept, different historical actors. Another possibility is that the gardens did exist in Babylon, but they were not as grand or hanging as described, perhaps integrated into the ziggurat or palace complex in a way that modern archaeology hasn't yet fully identified. Or tragically, perhaps their construction was indeed ephemeral, built from materials that simply haven't survived the millennia of neglect and subsequent destruction. The truth, frustratingly, remains elusive, regardless of their physical existence. The legend of the Hanging Gardens serves as a powerful symbol of the opulence, engineering prowess, and imaginative ambition of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. They represent a cultural yearning for beauty and luxury, even in the harsh realities of empire building, reminding us that even the most powerful rulers sought to create wonders that transcended mere functionality. This dream of a verdant paradise, however, would soon be overshadowed by the arrival of a new power from the east, a conqueror who would take Babylon not with a siege, but with a surprising display of political acumen. Imagine a colossal empire, seemingly at the height of its power and splendor, whose fabled capital is considered impregnable, yet it falls not with a thunderous crash of battle, but almost silently from within. This is the astonishing narrative of the Persian conquest of Babylon, narrating Cyrus the Great's swift and bloodless takeover of the city. We just explored the captivating mystery of the Hanging Gardens, a symbol of Nebuchadnezzar II's grand vision for Neo-Babylonian magnificence. Yet, even as Babylon shone brightest, a new formidable power was gathering strength on its eastern flank, one that would bring an end to thousands of years of independent Mesopotamian rule. Historians still argue whether the fall of Babylon was primarily due to internal dissent and a disaffected populace, or if Cyrus's strategic genius and superior military organization were the decisive factors. By the mid-6th century BCE, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, though outwardly prosperous and grand, was beginning to experience internal decay and face growing external threats. Following the long and successful reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, his successors were, for the most part, weaker and less effective. There were succession disputes, political intrigues, and a perceived decline in religious piety, particularly under the last independent king, Nabonidus, reigned c. 5v6 539 BCE. Nabonidus, often described as an eccentric or overly scholarly king, spent much of his reign away from Babylon, dedicating himself to the worship of the moon god Sin and neglecting the traditional patron deity of Babylon, Marduk. This alienated the powerful Marduk priesthood and much of the Babylonian populace, who felt neglected and disrespected by their king. Imagine a modern leader who spent all their time on a personal spiritual quest while the country slowly fell apart. It wouldn't go over well, would it? Meanwhile, to the east, a new force was rapidly emerging. The Persian Empire, under its charismatic and brilliant founder, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus, originally king of Anshan, had successfully united the various Persian tribes, and then, in a stunning series of military victories, conquered the mighty Median Empire, Babylon's former ally, in 450 BCE, and the wealthy Lydian kingdom in Anatolia in 547 BCE. He was not just a military genius, he was also a master of propaganda and diplomacy, cultivating an image as a liberator rather than a conqueror, promising religious tolerance and respect for local customs. This contrasted sharply with the harsh policies of the Assyrians and the perceived neglect of Nabonidus. Cyrus meticulously planned his conquest of Babylon. He understood the city's strategic importance and its immense wealth. He also recognized the internal discontent brewing within Babylon, particularly among the Marduk priesthood and a population tired of Nabonidus's rule. He positioned himself as the rightful restorer of order and traditional Babylonian piety, a cunning move that garnered support from within the city itself. Imagine a conquering general arriving not with overwhelming force, but with an offer of peace and stability, promising to respect your gods and traditions. It's a rather clever tactic for achieving a bloodless victory, if you can pull it off. The final act came in 539 BCE. According to various historical accounts, including the Babylonian Chronicle and later Greek sources, the Persian army, led by Gobryas, a general loyal to Cyrus, approached Babylon. Rather than launching a direct assault on the city's formidable walls, Cyrus's forces employed a clever strategy. They reportedly diverted the waters of the Euphrates River, which flowed directly through the city, reducing its level. This allowed Persian soldiers to wade into the city through the riverbed, bypassing the supposedly impregnable defenses. Alternatively, it's possible that the city's gates were simply opened from within by disaffected elements of the population, or even the priesthood, eager to welcome Cyrus as a liberator. The traditional biblical account in the Book of Daniel also points to a night of revelry and hubris within the city just before its fall. Historians still debate the exact details of the entry, but the outcome was undeniable. Babylon fell swiftly and remarkably, without a major battle within the city itself. Nabonidus was captured, and Cyrus entered Babylon as a triumphant liberator, not a destructive conqueror. He immediately issued the Cyrus cylinder, a famous clay cylinder inscribed with a proclamation that confirmed his benevolent policy. He returned statues of gods to their original shrines, allowed deported peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands, and presented himself as a legitimate successor to the Babylonian kings chosen by Marduk himself. This act of religious tolerance and cultural respect was a stark departure from the Assyrian model of conquest and terror. The Persian conquest of Babylon marked the end of thousands of years of independent Mesopotamian rule, the final chapter in the story of a native-born empire in the land between the rivers. It heralded the beginning of a new era, one of vast interconnected empires, where Mesopotamia, while still important, would become just one province within a much larger global dominion. Imagine a world where the land of the two rivers, the cradle of civilization, was no longer ruled by its own kings, but became just one jewel in the crown of an empire so vast it stretched across 3 continents, from the borders of India to the shores of the Aegean Sea. This is the new reality brought about by Achaemenid imperialism, outlining the vast Persian Empire that absorbed Mesopotamia and shaped its destiny for centuries. We just witnessed the astonishingly swift and largely bloodless Persian conquest of Babylon by Cyrus the Great, an event that symbolically ended millennia of independent Mesopotamian rule. Now, Mesopotamia, though still immensely wealthy and culturally significant, entered a new phase of its history, integrated into a global superpower, and its role fundamentally changed. Historians still argue whether Persian rule over Mesopotamia was largely beneficial, providing stability and infrastructure, or if it suppressed local identities and autonomy in favor of imperial control. Following Cyrus the Great's conquest in 539 BCE, Mesopotamia became a crucial but no longer independent part of the burgeoning Achaemenid Persian Empire. Cyrus, as remember from our last chat, had wisely presented himself not as a destructive conqueror, but as a liberator and a legitimate successor to the Babylonian kings chosen by Marduk. This policy of religious tolerance and respect for local customs was a hallmark of early Achaemenid rule, a stark contrast to the brutal Assyrian methods. The Achaemenids understood that a contented populace was a productive populace, and so they generally allowed subject peoples to maintain their own languages, religions, and traditions, as long as they paid their taxes and remained loyal to the great king. It's almost like a very early version of a federal system, but with a supreme emperor at the top. Under Cyrus and his successors, notably Darius the Bound, reigned 522 to 486 BCE, and Xerxes I, the Persian Empire reached its territorial peak, becoming the largest empire the world had yet seen. Mesopotamia, with its fertile lands and ancient cities, became one of the most valuable satrapies, provinces, of the empire. It was incredibly rich, providing substantial tribute in silver, grain, and other resources to the Persian imperial coffers. Babylon itself, though no longer an imperial capital, remained an immensely important city, serving as an administrative center and a hub of trade and learning within the Persian system. Imagine the constant flow of goods and people from across the empire converging on this ancient crossroads, making it even more of a cosmopolitan melting pot. The Persians, however, were not simply passive rulers. They actively invested in the infrastructure of their empire, much of which benefited Mesopotamia. Darius I, in particular, was a master administrator. He organized the vast empire into some 20 satrapies, each governed by a satrap, governor, who was usually a Persian noble, directly responsible to the great king. To ensure loyalty and efficiency, the king employed a network of king's eyes and ears, royal inspectors, who secretly reported back on the satrap's conduct. This system, along with a standardized currency, a uniform legal code, though local laws were also respected, and a highly efficient postal service, the famous Royal Road, ensured remarkable connectivity and control across the sprawling empire. It's a level of centralized planning that would make many modern logistics companies green with envy. While the Persians generally allowed cultural autonomy, their rule also brought new influences to Mesopotamia. Aramaic, a Semitic language distinct from Akkadian, increasingly became the lingua franca of the empire due to its simpler alphabet and widespread use by Persian administrators, gradually replacing Akkadian in daily use. Persian administrative practices, artistic styles, and religious ideas, such as Zoroastrianism, though it did not replace the traditional Mesopotamian pantheon, also made their way into the region. For the average Mesopotamian, life under Persian rule was likely stable, perhaps even more so than under the often warring local dynasties. They contributed taxes, occasionally provided soldiers for the Persian army, and continued their daily lives under a new imperial umbrella. However, Persian rule was not without its challenges and periods of discontent. There were occasional rebellions in Babylon, especially during times of political instability within the Persian royal house, such as during the reign of Xerxes I. These revolts were typically brutally suppressed, leading to instances of destruction and the removal of symbolic elements of Babylonian power, like the golden statue of Marduk. Despite these episodes, Mesopotamia remained firmly under Persian control for over 2 centuries, a testament to the effectiveness of Achaemenid administration and military power. This long period of Persian dominance effectively ended Mesopotamia's independent imperial legacy, paving the way for the arrival of an entirely new cultural and political force from the West, one that would bring with it a completely different vision of empire. Imagine a world where the established order of empires, painstakingly built over centuries, is suddenly swept away by the lightning-fast campaigns of a single brilliant general from a distant land, forever altering the cultural and political landscape. This is the dramatic reality of the Hellenistic aftermath, discussing Alexander the Great's conquests and the subsequent Seleucid rule that brought Greek influence deep into the heart of Mesopotamia. We just witnessed Mesopotamia integrated as a vital yet subservient province within the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire, a period of long but ultimately foreign rule. Now we turn our gaze westward to a force that would shatter the Persian dominion and infuse the ancient Near East with a vibrant new cultural synthesis, truly marking the end of an independent Mesopotamian identity as it had been known for millennia. Historians still argue whether Alexander's conquests ultimately brought greater prosperity and cultural exchange to Mesopotamia, or if they primarily served to exploit the region's resources for the benefit of a new foreign elite. The catalyst for this profound shift was Alexander the Great, the young king of Macedon. Following his father Philip II's unification of the Greek city-states, Alexander embarked on an ambitious campaign of conquest, aiming to avenge the Persian invasions of Greece and to establish a universal empire. His military genius was unparalleled, and in a series of decisive battles, Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, he systematically dismantled the seemingly invincible Persian Empire. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought in 331 BCE near modern-day Mosul in Iraq, was particularly significant for Mesopotamia, as it was here that Alexander utterly defeated Darius III, the last Achaemenid king, effectively opening the way for his conquest of Babylon. Imagine the sheer audacity of this young man, leading a relatively small army across vast territories to challenge the greatest power on earth, and succeeding. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed, unstoppable force. When Alexander marched into Babylon in 331 BCE, he was welcomed not as a conqueror, but as a liberator from Persian rule, much as Cyrus had been centuries before him. The priests and populace reportedly greeted him with enthusiasm, eager to be rid of the Persian yoke, especially after Xerxes' I had damaged Babylonian religious sites. Alexander reciprocated this goodwill. He ordered the restoration of the Etemenanki Ziggurat, acknowledged the authority of the Marduk priesthood, and showed respect for Babylonian traditions. He even intended to make Babylon the capital of his vast new empire, recognizing its strategic importance and its millennia-old legacy as a center of culture and administration. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though Mesopotamia might once again be at the heart of a world-spanning empire, albeit one led by a Macedonian king. However, Alexander's premature death in Babylon in 323 BC, at the age of 32, plunged his vast empire into chaos. Without a clear successor, his generals, known as the Diadochi, successors, immediately began to squabble over control of his territories. This period of intense conflict, known as the Wars of the Diadochi, lasted for decades and ultimately resulted in the fragmentation of Alexander's empire into several Hellenistic kingdoms. Mesopotamia, along with much of the former Persian Empire's eastern territories, fell under the control of Seleucus Nicator, one of Alexander's most capable generals, establishing the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire, c. 312 to 63 BCE, was the largest of the Hellenistic kingdoms, stretching from Anatolia to India. Seleucus and his successors, known as the Seleucid kings, ruled Mesopotamia for nearly 2 centuries, fundamentally altering its cultural landscape. They adopted many Persian administrative practices, but they also enthusiastically promoted Hellenism, the spread of Greek language, culture, art, philosophy, and political institutions. They founded numerous new cities throughout their realm, built on the Greek model with agoras, theaters, and gymnasiums. One of the most important of these new foundations was Seleucia on the Tigris, a purpose-built capital city located north of Babylon, which gradually eclipsed ancient Babylon in importance as a center of commerce and administration. This influx of Greek culture led to a fascinating period of cultural synthesis. While Mesopotamian traditions, especially in astronomy, mathematics, and religious practices, continued, they increasingly interacted with and were influenced by Greek ideas. Greek became the language of administration and high culture, though Akkadian Cuneiform continued to be used for scholarly and religious texts, especially by the Babylonian priesthood, until the very last centuries BC. The once vibrant cities like Babylon saw a decline as populations shifted to the new Hellenistic centers. This period marked a profound transformation for Mesopotamia, bringing it firmly into the broader Hellenistic world, forever changing its identity. Its ancient legacy would continue to inform its culture, but it would always be viewed through a new, distinctly Greek lens. Imagine a land that has been a continuous battleground of empires for millennia, now caught between 2 emerging giants, each with their own distinct cultural identities and imperial ambitions, further transforming its ancient heritage. This is the prolonged and complex period of the Parthian and Sasanian eras, briefly touching upon these later empires that maintained aspects of Mesopotamian heritage while imposing their own distinct rule. We just explored the Hellenistic aftermath, detailing how Alexander the Great's conquests led to the Seleucid Empire and the significant infusion of Greek culture into Mesopotamia. While Greek influence remained, the political landscape of the Near East was far from static, and new powers would emerge from the Iranian plateau to challenge and ultimately displace the Hellenistic successors, carving out their own long chapters in Mesopotamia's story. Historians still argue whether the Parthian and Sasanian periods represented a genuine revival of ancient Near Eastern traditions, or if they primarily consolidated a new form of imperial Persian control over the region. The decline of the Seleucid Empire in Mesopotamia was largely due to relentless pressure from the east, specifically from the Parthians. The Parthians were an Iranian people, originally from the region of Parthia, modern-day northeastern Iran, who rose to prominence in the mid-3rd century BCE. They were formidable horse archers and adopted elements of both Persian and Hellenistic culture, creating a unique hybrid. Under kings like Mithridates the Wren, they systematically conquered the eastern satrapies of the Seleucid Empire, including Mesopotamia, which they fully controlled by the mid-2nd century BCE. Imagine a cavalry-based empire known for its lightning-fast maneuvers, slowly but surely eroding the control of a more traditional, infantry-based imperial power. It's like watching a guerrilla army slowly chip away at a superpower. The Parthian Empire, CC 247 BCE, 224 CE, ruled Mesopotamia for nearly 4 centuries, making it one of the longest continuous foreign rules over the region. While they largely maintained existing administrative structures, including the Hellenistic cities like Seleucia on the Tigris, which they initially used as a capital before founding Ctesiphon nearby, they also brought new cultural influences. Aramaic, in its various dialects, continued to be widely spoken, and the ancient cuneiform script, though increasingly rare, saw its very last attested uses during the Parthian period for astronomical and religious texts. The Parthians often allowed a considerable degree of local autonomy, particularly to the temple cities of Babylonia, which allowed some aspects of traditional Mesopotamian culture and scholarship to persist, albeit in a diminished form. This was not always a period of grand monumental building in Mesopotamia, but rather one of cultural endurance and adaptation under new masters. However, the Parthian Empire was often engaged in prolonged and costly wars with the Roman Empire to their west, with Mesopotamia frequently becoming the battleground. Cities like Ctesiphon and Hatra, a prominent caravan city under Parthian influence, were repeatedly besieged and sacked by Roman armies, leading to widespread destruction and instability. Imagine Mesopotamia as a perpetual tug-of-war rope between two giants, constantly being stretched and pulled, with the local populace caught in the middle. These conflicts drained resources and contributed to the internal instability that eventually led to the Parthians' downfall. The Parthian Empire was finally overthrown by another powerful Iranian dynasty, the Sasanians, in 224 CE. The Sasanian Empire, 224-651 CE, saw themselves as the true successors to the Achaemenid Persians, committed to restoring the glory of ancient Iran. they established a highly centralized and powerful state with a strong Zoroastrian religious identity. Mesopotamia, often referred to as Asuristan or Suristan by the Sasanians, became one of the most important and prosperous provinces of their empire, known for its rich agriculture and strategic location. The Sasanian capital, Ctesiphon, located on the Tigris, became one of the largest cities in the ancient world, a testament to the continued importance of Mesopotamia within their imperial structure. Under Sasanian rule, Mesopotamian culture continued its slow transformation. While the ancient Mesopotamian languages, Akkadian, Sumerian, had largely vanished from daily use by this point, and their ancient religious practices were heavily marginalized by Zoroastrianism and the rise of Christianity and Judaism, some aspects of Mesopotamian scientific and scholarly traditions, particularly in astronomy and mathematics, were preserved and transmitted, often through Aramaic-speaking scholars. The Sasanians also engaged in massive irrigation projects, ensuring the continued agricultural productivity of the region, and maintained extensive trade networks that connected Mesopotamia to both east and west. This long period, stretching from the Hellenistic era through the Parthian and Sasanian empires, saw Mesopotamia gradually lose its distinct, independent identity, becoming more intertwined with the broader Iranian world. Yet even as its ancient traditions faded into memory, the land between the rivers had laid the foundational bricks for human civilization, a legacy that would continue to echo through the ages, long after its original voices were silenced. Imagine standing on the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia today, feeling the dust beneath your feet and realizing that beneath you lie the buried dreams, innovations, and stories of over 5,000 years of human endeavor. This is the legacy's enduring echoes. A final look at the lasting impact of the oldest civilization on the modern world. We've traversed millennia, from the very first scratches of cuneiform to the vast empires of the Parthians and Sasanians that ultimately absorbed ancient Mesopotamia. Now, as our journey through time concludes, we reflect on how this remarkable civilization, despite its eventual political disappearance, laid foundational bricks for almost everything we take for granted in our modern lives, proving that even buried cities and forgotten languages can profoundly shape the present. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia's greatest contribution was its technological innovations, its social and legal structures, or its profound influence on subsequent religious and philosophical thought across the globe. Think back to the earliest Sumerians, those tireless innovators who figured out how to manage the unpredictable rivers. Their invention of large-scale irrigation systems wasn't just about growing more food. It was about creating a surplus, which freed people from constant subsistence farming. This surplus, in turn, allowed for specialization of labor, leading to the rise of craftsmen, priests, soldiers, and administrators. Without that fundamental shift, the complex societies we live in today, where not everyone is a farmer, simply wouldn't exist. It was the first domino in a long, complex chain reaction that led to our urbanized, interconnected world. Then, there's writing. The Sumerians' creation of cuneiform, driven by the mundane need to keep records, blossomed into the very first system for recording human thought. This wasn't just a fancy way to draw. It was the birth of history itself, allowing knowledge to be accumulated, transmitted, and built upon across generations. Every book you read, every email you send, every bit of digital text on your screen owes a debt to those first wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay. Imagine a world without written language. Our collective knowledge would be trapped in fleeting memory, constantly being lost and reinvented. It truly is one of the most profound inventions in human history, perhaps the most profound. Beyond these practical inventions, Mesopotamia gave us the very concept of the city itself, the first urban centers, with their intricate social hierarchies, monumental architecture like ziggurats, and complex administrative systems. They developed the earliest forms of governance, with kings, laws, remember Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi, and a bureaucracy to manage large populations. The idea of codified law, where rules are written and apply equally, or at least predictably, to different classes, is a Mesopotamian legacy that underpins legal systems worldwide. We still wrestle with many of the same legal and social issues that Hammurabi tried to regulate, just with slightly fancier courtrooms. Consider their advancements in mathematics and astronomy. The Mesopotamians developed a sophisticated sexagesimal number system, which is why we still divide our hours into 60 minutes and our circles into 360 degrees. Their meticulous astronomical observations, initially for religious divination, led to an incredibly accurate calendar and the ability to predict celestial events. Many of the constellations we recognize today were first charted and named by Mesopotamian stargazers. So the next time you look at a clock or glance at a star map, you're indirectly engaging with the intellectual legacy of ancient Babylon. Even their myths and literature, particularly the Epic of Gilgamesh, resonate deeply. This story of friendship, mortality, and the quest for meaning tackles universal human themes that are as relevant today as they were 4 millennia ago. It also contains one of the earliest flood narratives, a theme that reappears in countless cultures and religions, including the biblical account. The very concept of a hero's journey, of confronting loss and finding wisdom, began its written journey on Mesopotamian clay. Though the Akkadian and Sumerian languages are no longer spoken, and the great cities like Ur and Nineveh lie in ruins, their echoes are everywhere. From the concept of kingship to the wheel, from monumental architecture to the school system, from religious narratives to the very idea of a written contract, the people of ancient Mesopotamia laid the groundwork. They showed humanity how to live together in large numbers, how to organize, how to innovate, and how to create meaning in a complex world. Their struggles and triumphs, their insights and their follies continue to inform our present, a silent, enduring testament to the very beginning of our shared human story. And so, as the final echoes of ancient Mesopotamia fade into the gentle night, let us drift away from the dusty plains and towering ziggurats. The whispers of Sargon, the wise pronouncements of Hammurabi, the adventurous spirit of Gilgamesh, all now settle into the soft silence. Imagine the quiet hum of the ancient Euphrates flowing eternally, carrying secrets and stories from a time long past. There's a calming presence in knowing that even as great empires rose and fell, the fundamental rhythm of life continued, punctuated by the simple desires for order, discovery, and a place to call home. Allow the grandeur of those ancient cities, the meticulous craft of those long-lost scribes, and the sheer resilience of those pioneering spirits to wash over you, bringing a profound sense of continuity. Feel the gentle current of history carrying you effortlessly towards slumber, knowing that the very foundations of our world were laid by hands that tilled the soil and pressed their marks into clay beneath stars that still watch over us. Rest easy now. Let the wisdom of the ancients cradle your dreams and awaken refreshed, ready for a new day.